everyone to workshop 1 for theme 1 of NFT for the program. Given we have a very large distribution list for this and already 55 people, the main aim of this theme of testing is to exercise DIP and Helix together with no participants. So if we just go to the next slide. Right, so the agenda. Introductions. If you've not met me before as part of the NFT working group or the qualification working groups or the SIT working groups, I'm Ian. I'm in charge of NFT or NFT assurance as part of the SI delivery role for the program. What we want to walk through in this session is effectively the high-level overview of the set of performance test scenarios that we are proposing for theme 1, which is effectively just DIP and Helix. The format, which will literally take minutes given the performance test scenarios don't exactly fit in particularly well with the ADO design that we have for the rest of the program. For the later themes, it'll slot back in, but in terms of what we're doing for this one, it's effectively running a test and providing evidence. So as we walk through the themes from the next couple of slides, we're leaving open to questions as we walk through those. So we'll be covering the scenarios, the scope and boundaries of the sort of test environment that we want, scaling, monitoring. Where we have test cases, we've and ahed quite a bit about the format, but you'll find this it's become incredibly basic given the sort of information we're actually after for this type of test, for this theme specifically. Then Q&As, but I'm quite happy to take questions as we're walking through the processes. Followed by effectively what we wanted to have was an open session for evidence types, what or how methods that we'd need to sort of upload these. This will effectively roll into all of the other themes where we have different types of evidence required. So sort of design documents, how we securely store those for the assurance purposes. And then followed on for the final slide, which is next steps, respectively, just delivery dates and themes for the next workshops. Any questions so far? We've kind of covered most of this in me describing what we're actually doing. So looking at this, actors' roles and tooling. So we have Helix on, and hopefully somewhere on this large list of people, we have some people from Avanade on. They'll be solely responsible for the delivery of testing for theme 1 as it is. So any tooling and test stubs, test simulators, and data management from our side will need to be worked through with them via some bilaterals that I believe the SRO should be setting up to happen in the near future. Expected outcomes covered by monitoring. So depending on how the systems are actually set up for test harnesses and service management, that still needs to be discussed as well. So, yep. Q&A sessions, that's already been mentioned, that you can use Slido to come through this. Hopefully Angela's keeping a close eye on that and can give me a shout if anyone comes through, or just use the chat. I can keep an eye on that side as well. So you may have seen these slides if you're part of a non-functional working group. So proposal for theme 1 of test execution is effectively what we've been calling in the approach documents is a day in the life of the program's expected processing. So given the scale of the central systems involved, this is an area where, because they're both new, or relatively new in terms of some of the back-end processing in Helix. We want to see these running at as large scale as feasibly possible, with the main focus being on the largest amount of messages being pushed through the system. So that's consumption data, followed by migration processing, which, while temporary, will have some form of effect on the load with the 300,000 K a day threshold. The scenarios I'm going to walk through in a couple of slides have a very high level design based at the moment. So we're working through all of the input or the driving business processes through DIP that will eventually push the rest of the processing elsewhere in Helix and the participants, which will be stubbed. We're looking to try and exercise all of the systems in Helix. So at the moment, the scenario is, say, 85 to 90% complete, but we still need to work with the DIP and Helix guys to find any test data that we need to seed prior to running these tests, or in fact, include more business processes just so we can drive each area specifically under load. I was hoping to chat with the Helix and DIP teams prior to this to go through environment details and the tooling, but unfortunately that hasn't quite managed to set it up yet. So as we've mentioned before, we want to ideally run or stand up environments for DIP and Helix that would be production levels of processing, albeit with the small number of scenarios that we're actually running. This wouldn't be for too long, but we still need to bear in mind the test data creation and purely the cost of standing these up for this couple of weeks of testing on the SIP-B infrastructure. So next slide. So the scenarios we're expecting to run is effectively what's being driven out by the program's design and business teams for the messaging model. So we need to carry out some benchmark-based test runs. So depending on what sort of scale of environment we drives the actual size of the message loads that we're actually putting through. At the moment, we're running with the assumption that we can push through production levels of hardware. So we're proposing a sort of mid migration load test and a near end migration load test where we're still running at the peak migration levels, but larger MPAN data set working in the background. And then followed by the final test where we're running a post-migration performance test just to determine the overall effects or messaging profile that would occur on a sort of peak of peak day that's coming through. So going to not the QA slide quite yet. We shall walk through the scenarios once I can dig them out. So we have multiple themes based on MPANs running through this system. So we have post-migration volumes of 29 million MPANs. That will be the test with no migration background load. We have a mid-migration scenario defined for 14.5 million MPANs and a near-end migration scenario defined, which is based against, I believe it's 28 million, according to this spreadsheet. So I shall just quickly switch to the test cases. So we've followed, can everyone see this, my screen okay now that I've moved on to a spreadsheet?
I'm looking at your set non-functional test scenarios, theme 1.
Cool.
Yeah.
It's readable. Excellent.
Yeah.
Right. So this is the point where I told you it'd be quick. We have 5 scenarios defined. Ideally, we'd like a sort of minimum of 2 to 3 runs of each scenario, just so we can have a better selection point for data to compare the analysis against. So as we mentioned before, we have benchmark testing of DIP and Helix. This would be at the 14 million mark. Scenario 2 would be to include migration running at its benchmark figures of 300,000 a day, running alongside that 14.5 million number. A third scenario, which would be near-end migration. This would be running with a figure, I think I mentioned it, 28 million, 28.5 million MPANs. So the day-to-day messaging rate would ramp up significantly compared to the first rates. And then on top of that, we re-include the migration at 300K, followed by a post-migration, so day-to-day running after the 18-month period of MPANs being migrated into the system. So are there queries? I can start going through these scenarios in detail, but these spreadsheets will be issued after this for the start of the review process.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if there is, in this case, for this type of testing, a rationale for doing loads less than what we're going to receive at max, because effectively we need to operate the system at max, and if we can't, we need to work out how we can. I don't know what value there is in doing less than the maximum tests, and it just might extend the testing period unnecessarily.
Yes, for sure. So this was something that we were going to iron out in the bilaterals that Smita's setting up between us. So I think it's mostly dependent on what sort of scale of environment's going to be available. So everything is a black box to the NFT team at the moment. We don't know if you have like a swim lane based design, in which case the scale of the testing we can do can actually be sort of significantly lowered, just to
well, no,
the system scalable.
To be honest, we would only really be comfortable if we're testing Helix at production scale. I think it's too difficult to prorata these type of tests, and we need to see that from the DIP and Helix working together.
For sure, yeah, that's good. That's good. That we can probably remove some scenarios then from this and speed it up.
Also, just in terms of a bit more detail around the testing, and I think we can do this on the bilaterals. You know, what's your peak load? Have you worked out the modelling for what load will look like over a day, or are you averaging it across the day? That kind of stuff. And is it a day, or do you want to run it over a couple of days? We would need significantly more data depending on how you run, because the system, when we get into LSS, MDS, and VAS, they're running in parallel on different settlement days. And in our own testing, we're using quite a lot of data to do that. So yeah, I think maybe as part of the bilaterals, we can discuss what you want to get out of it in terms of the other elements of Helix.
Yes, definitely. So at the moment we have three scenarios. So we have a daytime running, afternoon session, and then evening session, which is effectively just the batches being kicked off. What we actually need to do is ensure that we have the right interfaces listed here so we can exercise all of the areas of Helix. In terms of the test data, we should be in a relatively good position because we're using option 3 from the SIT test data plan, which is effectively, I think we can roll up to the full 33 million MPANs.
Yeah, on the daytime running, I think looking at the non-functional requirements for the smart data services, there is the possibility that they can submit the bulk of their load early doors, and the testing take account of that through the DIP, and yeah, what's that profile going to look like? Because at the moment we're looking at potentially getting 8 million in the first hour in the worst case scenario.
Ah, right. So that's a little different to our benchmark timelines. So we've been running this based against the design messaging model that was created 2 months ago, I believe. So we're looking at, was that about 180 million IF21s? So 170 million-ish an hour running through regularly from midnight to 12.
There's only, well, you're talking about 29 million MPANs. So an IF21 would generally have the 48 readings in it. So is that readings or MPANs?
So these would be messages per MPAN coming through from this part. So the IF21 is also scalable, isn't it? So we can have multiple reads within that. So we need to work through the size of the messages coming through the system as well, just to work out an average.
Yeah, I'm not sure that's correct. Rob, are you recognising those figures? Rob Golding, that is, if you're still on.
Sorry, Nigel, I was on mute. I think this looks like the work that Sean and Mike did, where they front loaded all the F21 messages in the first hour of the day, and that should equate to 29 million. And I think we just said every meter will produce an F21 every day, be it a natural read or an estimated read.
So where'd you get 29 million in the first hour? Because the non-functional requirements have limits on what can be submitted. And if we're talking about, say, 30 million MPANs in existence, then that should be 30 million over the day, which is 30 million IF21s over the day, but bulked up.
You've got different services submitting them, haven't you? That's not one service. That's how many services they're just aggregate.
Yeah, but they're not going to submit 30 million each, are they? Because they're covering a smaller area. There's 30 million in total.
Yeah, so I'm guessing that's what that adds up to. Is that right, Ian?
Yeah,
so
that's what this adds up to. This is for smart meters coming in from the SDS to DIP. Then you have traditional.
So you can't have 180 million reading, 180 million messages being sent and that adding up to 30 million, unless you're counting each of the 48 hourly readings for a day as one IF21.
Yes, I think that's the basis for this. So out of that 870,000, one of those would be one reading per MPAN with the 48 hours.
Right, okay, and there's still a decision to be made about whether you're going to batch those with 48 per message, or for 1 day per message, or 2 days per message, or a week, or whatever.
Yeah, well, each single message would have 48 chunks, wouldn't it? So it's dependent on how everyone wants to batch up the IF21 messages, because you can have multiple readings for multiple MPANs in one on an IF21, can't you?
What assumption have you made about the DSP scheduling window?
Good question. This has come up before as part of the working groups, and as far as we've been told by the design team, this model is correct.
But yeah, but what does it assume? What does your model assume? What's the length of the window?
I haven't got So the document was released, I believe. I can't remember the name of the document.
If you just scroll over to the right, we can see probably, can't we?
Sorry, the right of,
Right, so you're reckoning it's 12 hours.
yeah.
Okay. Because obviously that's not been decided yet, so that will affect this test once that number has been confirmed, unless it's been confirmed recently and I've not been aware of it.
I think, Robert, can you take an action to double check that again?
Yeah, so this is just preliminary numbers.
Yeah.
You know, trying to get real numbers is probably, you can probably imagine, it's just a bit of a thankless task. Yeah, we've had loads of attempts at trying to derive a model that will produce this, and this is what Sean and Mike came up with. You know, all meter readings being sort of sent in the first 12 hours of the day.
I think we may have an in. Is Abhay Sharma? I think I saw your name coming up. No.
Yeah, and I am here in the call. This is Nirpan Rajendran. So myself and Abhay, we are both from Assurance, DCC Assurance. Yeah, for NFT. So yeah, you have been. Sorry, what was the question? Yeah.
So, do you know what the CSP rates are being proposed for your route in to our system?
Not top of my head, but I can check and I can ask Abhay to respond to you back on that.
Nice one.
Yeah, can you just ping me the question so that I can pick it up from there? Yeah, so whenever you are free. Yeah.
All right, cool. See, there's Dave Webster.
Oh, thanks, Ian. So I do recall Sean going through this when he produced it, and I remember there being loads of questions and concerns over it, but that it was based on what we knew at the time, and it kind of made sense. But from a testing point of view, does it not need to be simpler than this, in that there's a non-functional requirement that a data service can submit a sixth of their portfolio in any 1 hour? So does that not mean that at an industry level, a sixth of all the MPANs across the industry could in theory be published in the same hour? So is that not your peak, rather than complicating it with, you know, what's on the screen here?
The only caveat of that is whether you're allowed to collect that volume depending on your size, given the DSP scheduling window. No, I suppose that's not there. I suppose, but yeah, I suppose you're right. It's just a peak, isn't it, within the window?
Yeah, I think there are also ceiling rates, aren't they, configured within the DIP system. So I'm not sure if they convert through to the SDS.
Well, there is that requirement about a sixth of your portfolio. So I assume the ceiling rates are built into that requirement, in that any data service is allowed to submit a sixth of their portfolio in any 1 hour period. So if they all did the same 1 hour, highly unlikely, but if they did, then that's a sixth of the whole industry within 1 hour.
Yeah, that would up these rates, wouldn't it, as well? So I'll take that off and then try and chase through those requirements again.
I think the issue there, though, is that the vast majority of these readings will come from DCC, and they'll be collected during the DSP scheduling window, whatever that ends up being. So you will, as an SDS, you may not get a sixth of your portfolio within an hour, because that might be spread over 20 hours.
Yeah, from a Helix perspective, we're doing some ingress testing at the moment, and we are modeling it on basically the non-functional requirements. So if it is going to be less, it may affect things that we need to put in place to meet that requirement. But we also want confidence that the DIP can handle that overall if we're building to that spec. So this doesn't look relevant in terms of this being spread over 12 hours based on the non-functional requirements and how the industry operates. And we do need to test to the level that we potentially could receive.
I would imagine the Windows this is actually pessimistic, because the DSP scheduling windows the SLA is 24 hours on a DSP schedule request. So I think they're talking about pushing out to 8, aren't they? About 20 hours. I don't know, but that was the original idea. If that's the case, then these numbers will come down. But I think it just highlights the importance of finding out what the DSP scheduling window is, because it has such a profound impact on these numbers.
All right, so we can take that back and try and resolve prior to getting these reissued then, if any different. So I think, yes, we did have the multiple details for the test scenarios, but obviously out of date already. So in terms of the slideshow, just bear with me. Any further queries before I move on? Nope. Right, so this slide should be even quicker. Where we've just had a discussion around the load and scenarios. We obviously still need to determine the DSP scheduling and get that shored up before we actually run these sort of peak hourly process tests. We also need to confirm with Avanade that we can deliver or implement a production-like area of the infrastructure. We have some outstanding queries around test evidence. So for this theme 1, we have some very, very, very basic test cases where effectively it's just run the scenario, and then we have different test steps for the different participants loading up their own test evidence. One query we need to resolve, and it would be good to have everyone's input, is what we need to do with any of the design-based evidence that we're going to be requiring for the later themes of testing. I mean, how would some of these documents are probably going to be sort of secure, so will not be shareable with every other participant. So do we have any ideas on how we want to provide that to the program? Would it be secure email, raising a ticket with our monitoring system, service management system?
Sorry, I'm not clear on that question. Is it secure because they're MPANs and they're the MPANs that were in use, or because of anything to do with the testing?
No, so it's not really relevant to this part of the testing, but where we have NFRs that can only be assured via sort of supplying design documents saying, but with like sort of internal network config or the design of the system itself. It's more of documents that can't be shared around or available for everyone to view.
I understand, yeah.
What is the plan for MPANs? You manufacturing them?
Yeah, so for this, well, everything's going to be manufactured by the program data team. For this test, effectively, it's because it's only the 2 participants, we can create as much as we want. The only limiting factor we have, I believe, is the fact that settlements testing has now been moved on to SIP-B, and the time we actually need to load this data back in. For the later phases, we're relying on a lot smaller number of MPANs being created. We're effectively sticking with the, I think it's the CIT route for test data creation. Sorry, just heard a. So Annabelle, is there anything on the other system, or we taken most of the questions this route?
Yeah, nothing on Slido.
Good. Well, for this theme anyway. Right, we're happy to move on. Told you you'd get the rest of your afternoon back.
Sorry, what's the decision then on how that kind of evidence is going to be provided to the program and stored by the program to ensure that it can't be seen by other participants? Or is that an open question?
It's an open question. It's something we're working on with the design team at the moment, because that's obviously something they've had to do for their level of assurance for their initial stages.
And will that be fed through the working group meetings as to how that's going to progress?
Yes. So it's only really going to be relevant through the later themes of testing that are coming through. So we should have something in place before the next working group. What's that? It's 4 weeks away now. All right, I shall quickly move on. So next steps, we will issue our potentially out-of-date set of load scenarios for review by everyone. They are very, very simple. They are still a work in progress. We're obviously missing a couple of message types to actually physically push processing in all four of the Helix systems. I think we've covered most of the systems as it is. What we don't have or won't physically have is the historical amount of data for some of the larger systems to run, so sort of load shaping analysis. But that's an area that we would hope will be covered during pit testing by participants. So
I didn't quite catch the last one. You say you can't test the load shaping service, or
we can. We're proposing exercising all areas within Helix, but because of the sort of limitations in data and the time taken to load it, for example, we wouldn't be able to have a year's worth of consumption data in the system for a full sort of kind of yearly cycle of analysis.
You're not. I mean, the load shaping service is aggregating data or aggregating data 4 days ago, isn't it? Sending it out for all the actual data it's received. So should be working at full volume.
Is it just the 4 days?
Well, the profiles released for 4 working days, I think, after the settlement day.
Yeah, I certainly don't think it's a year. Hugo, I think, is on the call for Helix. Have you got any input on that?
I thought it's just the data collected on the day, and it's taking the average from that, isn't it? It's not taking the historical.
Yeah, you've got daily consumption and yearly consumption, isn't there?
Yeah, the 4 days
right.
is the period when it runs. So yes, that's correct. So it runs on calendar day 4. But it runs for all the MPANs, so it runs with, I don't know, 30 million, if that's our baseline for the tests. We should run it with 30 million in the load shape service as well.
So you might not have a sensible number in the annual total, but that doesn't matter. You still having to send out the flow.
Yes, I mean, we would not need, for example, LSS has some calculations that run, for example, for set 7 settlement dates. And in theory, when the service is running, it will use data from 7 settlement dates. But the service is also ready to run with less data. So if that data is not available, it can also run with 1 day of data, for example.
Yeah, I think we also need to remember that that would have already been tested during PIT. The main point is to effectively just validate the effect of the interfaces between the systems running at peak loads.
So just to clarify, Ian, you're not thinking that, for example, on the settlements side of things, we would, for example, Elix is not going to run LSS, MDS, and VAS at full load. You assume that's part of PIT?
Yes, yes. There will be data in there for it to process, but it won't be running with, say, a expected full data set sat on their systems. All right, any more questions before I finish off the slides?
I just had a question come through on Slido that says 2 working groups ago, it was mentioned that the program may be helping with tools regarding test harnesses and stubs. Is there any news on this?
Not presently. We're looking into the additional tooling we're going to require for qualification testing. So if what comes out of that may be of use if we're running at load. But again, nothing has been stated in any of the documents that we were actually going to provide that tooling. But we are looking to try and assist you guys. But we can't promise everything. Anything else? Bright note. Right, so remaining dates. So 2nd of May, the reviewed test scenarios and cases will be shared with the rest of industry, effectively you guys. Next theme will be, we say our day in the life processing. It's with limited data that we have for the latter phases of testing for NFT. We'll be attempting to shrink down the day into something that's usable and still offers some form of benefit in terms of end-to-end processing and all of the interfaces being exercised, albeit at very low volumes, or scaled volumes, sorry, to effectively prove that the end-to-end processing does work and it can be automated and that it still shows representative processing times relative to the performance testing carried out in PIT. And that will be due the 16th of May. Thank you for attending. Are there any queries before we close this off?
Yeah, Ian, when is the bilateral conversations in terms of more detail?
It's yeah, good question. I need to chase Smifa up because she's setting them up for us. So I'll give her a call straight after this again.
Thanks.
Yeah, Ian, we have the SIT functional bilaterals on Monday afternoons. Would these NFT be planned separately or would that be incorporated on the Monday afternoons?
I think given the detail we're actually after from Avanade at the moment around tooling, we're going to have to do it separately because we'll just take up the entire meeting.
Thank you.
Right. Yes, that's that then. Thank you for attending. And Chris, you want to say something? All right, thank you for attending, and we'll work to redress the scenario issues. And once we've got that confirmed, we'll reissue or issue for the first time the scenarios and the test cases for review.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers. Bye.